Today I want to continue our discussion of Swift syntax and see how far we get. And once we get through, I haven't quite hit the end of the chapters yet where I want to stop and then apply that to your homework assignment. So I'm not quite that far yet. I haven't gone far enough. So and I'm on page, oh, it's in my other office, a little bit further than we are right here. So we'll see when the assignment comes up. I think we'll be able to do something very similar to the assignment that's on the website. You can just write it in the playground and watch it run as it goes through the process, and watch it run as you build, which has its own value to it. So it's kind of a cool way to write programs as we go. One other note, the beta 6 is available. Right now the one that you have installed is beta 5. Is it going to make a difference? Maybe, maybe not. But you might want to go, I did a search for download Xcode 6. And the first link is to the Apple developer site. You can download it here. You probably won't be able to install it without the administrator password, but you still have it because I haven't changed them yet. It's on my list of things to do. So if you want to, in the background today, I don't know how that's going to work for you, but if you want to, in the background today, download beta 6 and install it, you can. I haven't sensed any differences yet, but that doesn't mean anything. Most of them may be well over our head, but maybe a few of the issues that we saw last time will be cleared up. Okay, according to my book here, this is the page I was on when we left. Or we were probably just kind of bouncing all around, and I was kind of asking you, what did you find in there that was interesting? So let's get back to that. What did you find in Xcode that was interesting, or just pick one of the topics that we have listed and tell me some more about it. No? Don't want to? Did we talk about optionals last time? I think we did, yeah, because I said there was an error in the book, and then I discovered I hadn't been reading it right, and there was no error in the book. There was one other technique that I found when I was digging around a little bit. It's in the book as well. It's just not explained very well. Is if you have an optional variable. So let's say I'm creating a variable. We'll call it my name, and that's a string that's optional, and we'll set it to nil. Remember, that's what we can do with the optional variables. We can then transfer that to a real variable that's not optional, if possible, using an if statement. So we could say something if let a name equal to my name. Okay, so now what's happened is we're transferring, if possible, this optional name to this not optional constant, right? Because this will assume that type, but this one's not optional. And if this is true, if this one has something in it, then this message will display. Otherwise, we could probably throw an else in here. And we should get that once we're done, right? Because right now it doesn't have a value, but if I change it up here to Voker, then it has a value. So I kind of like this technique because if it's real, then use this variable from then on. In the notes, it talks about automatically extracting or something like that. Forget what it was called. Number type conversions.
Unwrapping?
Thank you, unwrapping. Automatically unwrapping some of those things and using an exclamation mark to say, I know it has a value, so you don't have to give me the value. And we also had to convert it to an integer to pull out the integer value of it. By doing this, we're basically transferring what's in here, if it has anything, to there. It's unwrapped manually.
That syntax there is a name on the inside of the if statement, or does it go outside of it?
A name, in this case, Well, we wouldn't want it outside the if statement because part of what we're doing here is saying, does my name have a value in it? And if it does, I'm not going to try to use it later. This is my a name has a value. This is my unwrapping process. So what usually happens is in the true part here, you'll have 10, 20, 30, 130 lines of code that process the name if it exists. And if it exists, you process it using a name and move on because it exists. If it doesn't exist, then you do whatever you're going to do down here. So we're basically unwrapping it. And it's the same thing the book is talking about when they throw the exclamation mark on there. Once you know that it has a value, you throw an exclamation mark on it. And I'm trying to find that whenever I need it. Of course, my pages are different sizes and everything else here. Then you use the exclamation mark to say, I know it has a value, so you don't have to do the int and all those kinds of things. Well, the exclamation mark is nice, but you better remember to put it on that variable name. The only problem here is I need two variable names, my name and then the non-nullable a name. So I have two variables, but either one of the techniques works. But I kind of like this one because I don't have to remember the exclamation mark, but maybe it's because I'm new enough to Swift that it doesn't faze me. Neil?
I read in the book at a point where when you declare a variable or a constant, you can put the exclamation mark right there, and then it will be non-existent until a value goes in, and once a value does go in, it will never again be non-existent.
But you have to assign it a value right away. And if you put the I read that as well. It comes a little later in here. And if you put the exclamation mark right on it, you're saying it always has a value. Then why make it nullable? I didn't quite understand that when I read it.
I said it was useful for initiators in classes.
All right.
And I suppose a slight performance boost, like if you want to put them all at the top of your script or whatever.
But why make them nullable then if they're always going to have a value? Because you assigned them a value right away. I'm not sure. I can see where maybe when we talk about classes, it'll sneak in there a little bit, but off the top of my head, that example, and I just hit that just before class, so I didn't have a chance to study it and think about it a little bit more, but right, and that was, I think it's a little later, right? Optional binding, implicitly unwrapped, is that where it was? I think this is kind of where it's talking about it. These kinds of optionals are defined as implicitly unwrapped. You write it implicitly unwrapped by placing an exclamation mark rather than question mark after the type. Are useful when an optional's value is confirmed to exist immediately after the optional is first defined and can definitely be assumed to exist. Well, if it always exists, then why are we making it optional? That's the question I have here. And immediately after. All right, well, if I know it exists, and the examples don't seem to help me any here. Right, here's they declare it, and here they do this, and they immediately stick something in there. If they're immediately sticking something in there, then okay, I don't need the exclamation mark here. But why am I making it optional? I guess I could set it to null again later. To nil again later. But then I once again would have to check to see if it.
I think if it's done when it's declared, it can never be set back. Well, I don't know.
And this is a let, yeah, it's a constant, right?
Yeah.
It's a constant that's optional. That's nice, but I don't. I'll have to look at some advanced code someday to see it because it doesn't make the let makes it a constant. The assumed string says it, and the exclamation mark says it's optional, but it's implicitly unwrapped. Why even declare it as an exclamation mark? Why even declare it as a string? Why not just throw the equal sign in there?
One thing that ran through my mind last night that might be able to be an application for it is if you don't know what value you're going to put into it, but you want to put all of your variables in one spot at the top.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to, like, say, put a 0 in there. You have like a function somewhere down the road that's going to place some value, but you don't know what yet.
But can I do this? Let me see if I can even do this and put a null in it. Say it's implicitly unwrapped. Yes. Okay, so here I'm cheating. And I guarantee you, so this is kind of what Neil is talking about. Maybe I declare all my variables in a big pile, but I want to define the values for them a little later, but I guarantee myself that before I use it, I'm going to assign it a value. But it's still nillable, if you will. I don't know. So I can do that, and then this could still happen, right? My name doesn't have a value.
To me, that scenario just seems like poor planning.
Pardon me?
That type of scenario just seems like poor planning. 'Cause you're
Maybe.
saying-
Like I said, we're beginners here. I don't question the features of the language because some very intelligent people at Apple have put these features in.
Right.
So they must see a need for them. It's over my head right now. But to say it's poor planning, I don't know if I'd say that because I'm not as smart as the people at Apple. They're not going to throw things in this language just to aggravate me.
I think, to me, it seems like the point is it just makes it easier to use the variable. So you don't have to use the exclamation point every time. Yeah, like,
A nullable variable, and you don't have to use the and that's kind of what my technique here did as well, right? Is I don't have to use the exclamation mark. However, I did have to use another variable name to deal with it. We'll keep that in the back of our heads that that's how it works, and move on from there. I'm not a big user of nullable variables, except when did we start using it? Remember in Visual Studio, we started using them when we hit databases. Because I didn't want to put an empty string in the database. An empty string in the database is actually a string in the database. It takes up a little bit of space versus nil, which takes up no space. So I wanted nillable variables so that we could put them into the database as nil and save space. So we're still approximately 3.5 months away from database access, if all goes according to plan. So we'll keep that in the back of our mind. You're all smarter than I am. It'll stick in your mind. I'm not sure it will stick in mine. Anybody document assertions at all? Anybody look at them?
Yeah.
I got hung up on the nested functions.
The nested, yeah, well, we're not into functions yet, or did they talk about them in assertions? I don't think so. But anybody talk about assertions in your notes? Where'd you put them?
We have a IND,
Where? In the
I
IDE?
just put them at the end.
At the end, I put them in a section called debugging tools. You haven't seen this yet, but the assert function also exists in JavaScript, particularly if you're debugging with Firefox, and you can put in an assert. And you're basically using it for debugging. So I added a debugging section to my notes and said, if you wish, you can insert the assert command. And as the notes describe it, the assert command basically prevents your program from continuing if this assertion, age is greater than 0, is false. I see it as a debugging tool. The notes even talk about it as a debugging tool, or the book even talks about it as a debugging tool and not something that you should be using on a regular basis. I mean, if you actually want to do some processing and things, then throw an if statement in. But this is a debugging tool. But what's bizarre about it is that this message only shows up if the condition is false. And so it's almost backwards. You know, you look at this, when I look at it, I see assert age greater than 0. If it's true, do this, else do something. No, that's not the case. Assert age greater than 0 if it's false. Do this, and if you do that in the playground, you'll get that message. If you do it in a program, I'm not sure exactly what happens. I think it crashes and you get an error message with that in it. If the condition is true, your program goes merrily on its way. If your condition is false, the program crashes right there. So I'm going to do I don't know if I can do it on a nullable variable. Let's put that in here and say assert that my name is not equal to nil. And let's see what happens. Execution was interrupted, right? But notice I don't get any of that error message isn't included in here. Right? And it's not showing up out here. This error message is what happens when the assertion fails. So let's see if I can do this. And now the error message goes away. So the assert simply stops your program saying, I hit something that you didn't expect. If you didn't expect it, why'd you put an assert in there? You must have thought about it. So it's a debugging tool. It has value here and there. It's not something I've used a lot. But that's what I wanted you to know. It's not a command you put in your program. It's a debugging tool. And you can read a little bit more about when to assert them, but if a value is passed to a function, but an invalid value means that the function cannot fulfill its task, I would hope I'm not sending invalid values to my functions. That I've done my data validation before that. A value passed to means function. An integer subscript in an array is too big. I did something wrong. What happens when you try to access the 23rd element of a 22 element array? Your program crashes. What happens when I put it in assert? My program crashes. What's the difference? I don't see it. I haven't used asserts much, even though you'll do them again in web programming when we talk about Firefox and JavaScript a little bit. I don't use them a whole lot.
Apparently it's not just a nil, it's just that
Well, yeah, same thing.
that's just.
You know, I could put in an assert statement like I just did to say, I expect my name not to be nil, but it is. Uh-oh. Well, then there's something else wrong with my logic, I'm guessing. Otherwise, why has a nil made it to this point? Personally, I think the playground gives me exactly all I need for the assert. Because the playground will crash. Like anything else, a program will crash if your program's logic is not quite right. And these asserts are not something that you expect to see executing in a final version of a program. For those of you, I think everybody heard it, but I'm going to get it on this recording as well. Justin last week told me that LibreOffice has a Mac version. I've installed it on my laptop. I haven't had a chance to play with it too much yet, but it does install, it does run. It did open a couple of Word documents for me. How well it does with some of the complicated stuff that I generate, I haven't tested yet. But if you're looking for a quick way to take notes in Microsoft Word format, you can use LibreOffice for that. But if you do that, remember to save as a Word document, because after it's done, on my other grading machines, I don't have LibreOffice installed. So save as a Word document so you're very portable.
Word will open an ODT doc.
It'll open an ODT, but what did you send me? It was something different. It
sent
was a Google Doc.
Yeah.
Okay, and that one I couldn't open because he hadn't shared it with me. So Word will open ODTs, but it mangles those pretty well too if you're not careful. Okay, so where are we? Let's take a look. Come on, mouse, stick with me here. I'm at the basic operators. And anything interesting here? Arithmetic on a plus, minus, multiplication, / percent sign is what?
Remainder.
Modulus, remainder, I think that's what I heard. I haven't found that one yet, so
Yeah, I was just reading about it. They say it works with negative values.
Oh,
So
God.
it's a remainder.
It also works on floating point numbers too.
It works on floating point numbers, and
C#
Dude.
does that too.
yeah, it does. Do yourself a favor, because trying to figure out why would you want the remainder that's not a decimal. Remember the way I described it is it's the remainder of integer division. What's left over? Well, if you're doing decimal division, then I don't know how that works and why I would want it. Negative numbers, okay, it makes sense to me to some extent, but for the most part, I use it with positive integers and done. Yes, it works with the others, but
I can think of it as negative, but with decimals, it might be like if you were selling some product, like say something for $5.50, I'm just making up the price, and you want how much change that you guys amount.
yeah, but that's a straight subtraction. It gives me the same thing. It's not quite,
What's the, how much change could you have after buying?
Yeah, I have never used it. The fact that it exists is interesting, but I have never used it, and when I haven't played with it. If we want, we can play. Okay, let's see. You guys, I think it was. By the way, another shortcut key, but this is a Xcode shortcut key. Is command slash comments out a bunch of code. It's just a regular slash. All right, so let's see here. You want to do a variable price. You could probably make these be lets because they're not going to change. Price equals $12.75, and let the quantity equal 5. Why did I put a 0 on that? So I can do math with them together and not have to do conversions. I really have to think a little harder about my let's make everything the right type philosophy now. Because if I can't mix math, I can't do multiplication without doing implicit conversions. I'm not sure whether that should be a 5 without the decimal point or with the decimal point, because I know I'm going to do multiplication with it in a little while. And let's say that the rendered equals 100. Is this how it works? Help me out here. If I were doing dozens, I would divide by 12, right? And so I'm going to say, take the rendered and give me the leftovers after multiplying the price times the quantity. According to this, it's $38.35. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's pretty close. So let's find out what the total is. Yeah, it works. But notice I still had to do this. I could have said rendered minus and I would have got the same answer, right? Still had to do the price times the quantity. I'm not sure it works, but the modulus on a decimal number gives me the answer I would expect, but it still seems a little odd. But what if I changed my amount rendered. You gave me $200 instead of $100.
That's not even accurate.
Now the 61.65 goes in there twice. I could buy 2 times my quantity rendered. I'm not using it right, obviously. Well, it's giving me the right answer. Right. But I'm not using it right. I can't figure out a situation for this where I want to divide something by a decimal number, see how many times it goes in, see what's left over. Well, okay, let me try one more. I'm trying to come up with one here. Length, I have a piece of wood whose length is, let's make it 81.5 inches long. Okay, and I want segments that are 10.3 inches long.
Do you mean firewood?
Yeah.
Yeah, but good enough. You get the idea. It still shows me what I need here. So I wanted firewood, and there's 9 inches left over, which makes sense. And if I make this a really long piece of wood,
So just a it looks more simplistic rather than saying, take 10.3 or 181 divided by 10.3 and subtract it
Right.
from the total. It's just
Right.
quicker.
It's a little quicker
cleaner.
if you're using decimal places. So in this case, if I want to know how much scrap wood will I have left over, I can figure it out. Okay, maybe that'll find some home. So you can use it with decimal numbers. And with negative numbers, it works a little more like you'd expect. Sometimes the remainder is kind of bizarre because when you mix negative and positive integers and do division, there's always an integer involved in there someplace, and or a negative number involved in there someplace, and it can get a little crazy. Okay, instead of me digging through the book here, what else was in your notes that was interesting? And if you, I don't know if I want to talk about nested functions just yet. Any of the simple stuff, the for loops, the
Strings are mutable.
strings are mutable. What does he mean by that?
No.
Value can change.
The value can change. That's what mutable means. In many languages, strings aren't mutable. If I did something like this, what's the concatenation operator? Plus. Okay, and yes, you can concatenate using a shortcut operator. I just verified that. I didn't know it for sure. I suspected it. Right. But how many variables do it really have here? One. In many languages, when you do this behind the scenes, it creates a brand new variable. You have a variable called myName. When you concatenate something to the end of it, in many languages, it creates a temporary variable. It's called temp. Copies myName into it, concatenates it, stores that in temp, and then it makes myName point to it because the string itself can't change.
And that's why in C# it was so slow.
That's why, yeah, remember there was a couple of examples where we had some things where we can concatenating lots and lots of strings. It was very slow when we did that. It was primarily slow because we were doing it using the contents of a text box. Right? When we did it in memory, it worked a little bit better, but it still can slow things down when strings are immutable, meaning they can't change. If you want to modify a string, it basically behind the scenes what it does for you is it creates a new string with the same name as the old one. And then cleans up its garbage when it's done. Right, here, strings are mutable. They're flexible enough that it doesn't create a new string, so they should process faster. And you can concatenate onto the string as much as you want.
So when you're coding, you're not necessarily going to notice the mutable as much, but when your program's running, you
Yes, that's correct. You're not probably, it depends on the language. Some languages won't even let you do it. There are very few of those anymore. But if the language, it's good to know that your strings are mutable so that you don't have to try to think about the most efficient way to concatenate. You let the language do it. In this case, they're mutable, so they'll change, and it should be very efficient. But you're right, you won't notice in your code. This code will probably work in any language, curly bracket language that you've seen. It'll work, but behind the scenes, it'll be a little slower. But when we're concatenating Gaul to Volker, a few billionths of a second, we probably won't notice the difference. What else do you find out about strings?
If you want to add a variable into it, it's another string, for example.
You can append a character.
You can also, instead of doing the concatenation,
Most languages, that works, right? Not here, mixed type. What I'm discovering about Swift is mixed type is bad news. Don't like it. A couple ways we can deal with this, right? First, typecast it properly. I'm still pressing end to get to the end of the line.
what you can also do is, instead of concatenation, although it's not as easy as you can do a slash there.
Okay, so here's version 2. I'm not, that end worked. What the heck? If you do, is it a slash or a backslash?
Backslash.
Backslash, parentheses, and put the variable in there.
And it will,
It'll insert the contents of the variable.
But it has to be inside the string.
But it has to be inside the quotation marks, that's right. But that's what we're doing. That's the purpose of the backslash parentheses, is to allow you to put the contents of a variable inside of a string. Versus other languages that just simply allow you to concatenate them and they automatically convert it to a string. And that gets kind of funky when you're doing doubles, but everything, or dates, those kind of things, but everything else works well. Here, you can put any expression in there. If I want to be younger, I can change it. The parentheses can be any kind of calculation slash expression. Anything goes in there. So you could probably format your doubles. I haven't figured out how, I haven't gotten to formatting my numbers yet in my output. Okay. But you can do the formatting and stick it right inside your strings here. This is very similar to PHP. PHP, in certain circumstances, which is aggravating, allows you to embed variables inside a literal like this. But in PHP, variables always start with a $sign, so they're fairly recognizable. And who would put the word $age inside of a string? And that works pretty well there too, but if you start trying to manipulate it, then it doesn't work and you have to go back to concatenation. Here, because of the parentheses, I can manipulate my variables, format them, do whatever else I need to them inside the string as well, and only have that temporary copy of it stuck inside. Good. Questions? Okay. There's another one I want to show you, or not show you, but discuss because it was in the book. It might have been in the first chapter. I discovered that Paul was reading the first chapter, which after about 40 pages gets really, really complex. Right? And so luckily I saw him reading around it there, or he asked me questions about something, and I said, well, beyond me right now. Okay. But there are a couple of handy things in those first 20, 40 pages or so in that first chapter that I didn't assign to you, but I think everything that's in that first chapter is also covered in these follow-on chapters. But where was I going with this? I think that may be where this example was, but it's in a case statement. What's a case statement look like?
switch.
Parentheses? No. No parentheses. Variable name, whatever variable I want. So let's add another one. Switch statement, and I can look at the variable. Case, strings. This is also different. In some languages, you can't use strings in the switch statement. Those are becoming few and far between. I think JavaScript I have to remember. But for a while there was one language, it was Objective-C. The old version of C that didn't allow strings inside a switch statement, which was really a pain because you'd have to do if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else if. Right. Now with Swift, we've got the ability to do this. Case apple. Right, then we can do something, curly brackets, not necessary. What I find weird is the way this gets indented automatically. If you look in the book, they have the cases lined up with the switch. To me, that's a little uncomfortable because it doesn't show ownership. They're all kind of stacked together. And I can write some code here. Break? No breaks.
I tried to put the breaks and the parentheses around switch. It seems.
Yeah, it might be a leftover from, but why put them in? You'll get cross-eyed looks from Swift programmers if you put stuff in there you don't need. It's like semicolons at the end of the line. They still work. So what you're suggesting, well, parentheses, when you put parentheses around one thing, what does it do? Nothing. It's legal. No, it's not.
It's not giving me an error, but it's not running it.
Maybe because I never ended. Oh, I'm sorry. I did miss something. I had errors anyways. The entire switch statement does get curly brackets. Okay, and now everything's legal. Okay. And is there a break command? Can I put one in here? It still exists, probably for previous code, but you don't need it. Oops. Well, now
We
it's
do.
no, not that's not the error. I love this. Switch must be exhaustive. You have to handle every single string in the world,
You need it.
or put in a default. What that means to me is unless you're using a specially defined enumeration that has 5 or 6 values in it, and you deal with all of them, that your switch statements always have to have a default. Because you're not going to list every potential string. You're not going to list every potential integer. Unless you use less thans and greater thans and those kind of things, then maybe you'll hit them all. But in most cases, you're going to need a default. And notice how it indented it? As soon as it saw it, it said, no, this needs to be over there. You can override it, but I'm not sure if I'm gonna, because it seems like that's what Mac or Apple programmers think we should do. And what's really annoying is I have to have a default, and inside here, I have to have a statement. You can't simply leave it blank. So I usually just put some error message in there that I didn't expect to get here, but I had to put it there because Swift makes me put it there. I wonder if I could do this. Yeah, that's legal. But leaving it blank, saying do nothing, is not.
What if you make a comment?
I doubt it. And the error message says the switch label or the default label should have at least one executable statement in it. I would put a print line in there that just prints an error message that you never expect to hit if you've got everything covered up above. But I find it annoying that I have to have a default. I can't just skip over a switch statement like every other language can.
So if you say on your GUI you had for this select A, B, C, or D.
But they're
the
strings,
only
right?
options are A, B, C, or D.
You
still
know
have to
that,
have a default.
okay? His question for the recording is, say I have an input that says select A, B, C, or D. The only available options are A, B, C, and D, but those are strings, right? And those are the only ones that you have declared are variable. You know that those are the only ones that are available, but there's no way for the switch statement to know in advance that those are the only ones that are available. What if the user presses an E? Well, if you validate it and you know after the validation, you, the programmer, know that it's only going to be A, B, C, or D. There's no way for the switch statement to know that. So you still got to have a default.
It just tried the switch statement with integers, and there I could enter a default with a comment line, and it worked.
With a what?
That break.
Apparently, if you insert just the default and then break, it works.
Yes, that works, but break's one of those things that's supposed to be gone out of the language, and it's a nice way to work around the default. You got to do something. But on the other hand, it's just as simple to say print line unexpected value or unexpected fruit or whatever it is you're looking for. All right, so I'm going to leave it there, either one.
There's also the fall through statement now too.
A what?
A fall through,
Fall through,
yes.
as in here?
Fall through will make it go to the next.
I didn't know about that one.
So now that'll produce, it'll execute that case and then it will drop down to the default because that's.
It'll go to the next case.
The
All
next
right.
case.
So if I have a case here called what else? Cherry.
your case is missing a colon.
Thank you. Where's my error message? Guess I don't get a syntax error for that. There we go. Notice I get two outputs. Kind of hard to tell, but that's really what it's giving me is two outputs because it matched this, then it fell through. The fall through says do the next case even regardless. Okay. Those are very rare. Other languages, if you don't put a break in, like C#, if you forget the break in C#, actually in C#, if you forget the break, you get a syntax error.
C plus plus of it.
C++, if you don't put the break in, it automatically falls through. I'll have to check. I don't remember JavaScript, PHP. My guess is if you forget the break in a switch statement in those languages, it automatically just goes to the next one. Those are very rare. The examples that I usually give in the past is, let's say that we're at Smash. They've been knocking on my door lately, and their football players are selling Smash cards, and they have a reward system. And if you sell 5, then you get a free football. If you sell 20, then you get a free Packers jersey on top of the football. If you sell 100 of them, then you get free Packers tickets. And I'm making this up as I go. And the more you sell, the more prizes you get. Well, I'd have the case statement set up that says case 100. You get the tickets. Fall through, you also get the jersey. Fall through, you also get whatever I said you get out of 5 for a game of football. Okay. That falls through and you get, it prints that you get a jersey and you get tickets and you get a football. It prints all of them. It's the only example I've ever come up with where I want to fall through my switch statement and do multiple things. Okay. But notice if I choose cherry here, that I don't get the apple because it jumps down here and says cherry and the fall. Nice to know the fall through's there, but it's a very rare need, and that's why they've made it a separate command instead of making the switch statement work that way to start with. I want to add that to my notes here. Hang on a second. I don't anticipate you using it very often, but thanks for pointing that out. Where'd you find that one? Was it in the notes later?
It's in a
In the
different
book, I mean?
notes.
In a
Different book.
different book. Okay,
I found
that's
it here.
Oh, you found it there too?
you found it here. It's probably buried in here somewhere. You just haven't gotten that far
I don't know where I am.
yet.
Because I'm on the web version.
Oh, okay. And even I think even in this book version, the page numbers change as you size the pages. So I don't know.
Where I'm at, but I just seen they have a labeled statement, so you can label your loops with a name, and then so if you have a nested loop, you can break out of the outside loop by giving the name of the loop.
Yeah.
Or to
Wow.
continue.
It's kind of like a continue statement, but you can continue.
You can use continue or break with the name of the loop, and it will.
Okay. Well, none of you are talking about this stuff, so it must have all been old news. Comparison operators, I need to add those. Got a lot done this weekend, but getting to this, whoa, what was that? The nil coalescing operator. Okay, you didn't tell me about it, so what is it? Old news to you. We just read it and said, that's fine. Okay, let's go. The nil coalescing unwraps an optional A if it contains a value or returns a default value B if A is null. Whoa. That's kind of cool. Shorthand, there's an inline if. I hadn't seen that before yet either. Inline if looks like all the other languages. Condition, question mark. Unwrapped A is what that is. Else B. All right, but here's a short one. If you want to say if A has a value, then give it to me. Otherwise, give me whatever's in B. That's interesting. I'm guessing B could be a constant or a
Did
literal.
you find it in C# too?
This double question mark?
Yeah.
News to me. Never seen it before.
Yeah,
Double question? No, inline ifs, but not the double question mark.
I'm pretty sure.
Well, yeah, you're the one who's doing all the research on the
I think
nullable
Mikey found that
variables. So.
one. I've seen it at Skyward too.
Okay, I have not seen that one, so that's interesting. Okay. Might be handy if we're using nullable variables. And closed range, open range, logical not, nothing new there, exclamation mark. Logical and, 2 ampersands, good to know, not the same in every language. You're used to 2 ampersands because you're in curly brackets, but VB uses and. I think
And also,
Pardon me?
or and also.
And all, yeah, let's not even talk about and also, though we should if you're doing VB, but we're not. So or is 2 vertical bars, nothing really new. Combining them, be careful, what's the order of precedence? This uses multiple ands and or to create, however, the and the or still operate on only 2 expression values, so there's 3 chained together. In other languages, the and has a higher priority. So if we flip this around, if you have a door key or, the and gets processed first.
So left to right.
This one seems to be kind of what they're implying here, but they have the and first, so it would have been done anyways. But I didn't see anything here that said that the and operator, compound expressions, multiples, still only 2. It can be read as if we've entered the correct door and passed the retina scans, or if we have a key, or if we know the override password and allow access. Doesn't say anything about order of precedence. So, and I don't have a good example, so we'll save that for some other day. We can put parentheses in there and say do this first, then that, then that. In this case, it clarifies. Parentheses make it clear, the output doesn't change, but the initial intention is clear. This doesn't mean anything to you, but the NS string class was the Objective-C way of doing strings. There was a string in Objective-C, but this is a class that functioned pretty much like strings. But it was a pain because every time we wanted a string, we had to declare it as an NS string. And so now a lot of that's gone away, which is good. But they are seamlessly bridged to that. So when we say string, Swift is basically invoking NS string. So if you know anything about NS string, you can basically do the same thing with strings. String literals, we know. Empty string, we know about. We can ask is empty. We can also say not equal to the empty string, I think. Yeah, we were talking about that when Adam brought it up, the difference between mutable and not mutable strings. In Objective-C, behind the scenes, if you wanted a mutable string, one that you could change, you had to declare a mutable string versus an NS string. And that was another thing to remember, because you're so lucky. You heard this before? Wasn't that last year you guys were so lucky because things have changed? And now, the headaches we put up with in Objective-C, well, a lot of them are gone, which is good. So now we can mutate strings.
Can you write apps in Swift and put them in the App Store right now?
Absolutely. Well, right now,
Or do you have to wait till it's actually?
I think you might have to get past it because they wouldn't want stuff out there using beta versions of Swift until the beta clears, which is usually October. I would guess not. There may be people running full tests and modifying and watching whatever the change logs are in the latest and greatest beta. But I would say in most cases that if Apple were smart, they'd be going, not until the language solidifies, because you may have something up there that crashes. But really, no, let me take that back, because what happens when you create an app? You create an executable, basically. And the executable is just a bunch of ones and zeros anyways. You may not be able to compile your app again 2 weeks from now when the new beta comes out, or when the final version of Xcode 6 comes out. You might not be able to compile because you have syntax errors. But you have a compiled version that executes the way you want it to, so you should be able to put that in the store, but then it's your job to then go modify it to work with the latest and greatest the next time you want to make a change.
the other question I have is, so Swift is for iOS, but does it also work to say if you were going to create like desktop programs for Mac? Is
I
that-
believe it does work for IMAX as well. Yes. You just when you pick a project, you will say I want to create a Mac project versus an iOS project. And so you could create your own new application for an iMac as well. I'm pretty sure it'll work for both. All right, let's pause there, take a break, come back, and we'll talk. I'm interested in this character thing, so during the break, I'm going to read about it.